Formula One is well known as the pinnacle of motor racing, with the best drivers, cars and teams all fighting against each other for top prizes. However, what if I were to tell you that for 2 years, Formula One cars weren't Formula One cars? They were in fact Formula 2 cars. Can you imagine this in modern day Formula One? Max Verstappen driving for MP Motorsport and Charles Leclerc driving for Prema, fighting for the title. It seems impossible, but let me tell you the story of when F1 drove F2 cars. When the Formula One World Drivers' Championship started in the year 1950, there were 3 different distinctive types of Formula One teams. These were works teams, customer teams, and privateers. You may be familiar with the first 2 types as they still exist in Formula One today, but let me explain them for argument's sake. A works team is a team that builds its own chassis and engines in-house. These are usually big road car manufacturers who have entered Formula One, such as Ferrari, Mercedes and Renault in recent years. A customer team is one that buys its engine and possibly other intellectual property from other teams or outside companies. In modern day Formula One, Williams, Alfa Romeo and Haas are examples of a customer team, as they all buy engines from Mercedes and Ferrari respectively, with Haas having previously had an agreement with Ferrari to use some of the team's old parts from the previous season on their new car. Lastly, there are privateer teams. The definition of what exactly was a privateer team changed as Formula One evolved, but in this context, in 1950, when the championship started, privateers were essentially freelance drivers searching for a drive. They would often enter with an eponymous team, aka a team named after themselves, usually fielding one chassis where they would drive in hope of getting a good result so they would be recognised by the big teams of the time and would get a works drive. This strategy worked for many drivers including Stirling Moss and Juan Manuel Fangio. However, this whole structure would be shaken up by the actions of one team. When F1 started in 1950, there were only 2 seriously big works teams, namely Alfa Romeo and Ferrari. Due to the effects of a lack of money following World War II, teams were running old car designs. Very old car designs. So old that Alfa were running a car that competed in races as early as 1937 in 1951. That would be like Red Bull running their 2009 spec car this season. As the end of 1951 came around, Alfa realised that their 14-year-old design was becoming out of date, and therefore they decided, instead of designing a new car, they would just pull out of Formula One. This left Ferrari as the only remaining works team. One other detail I forgot to mention is that the works teams in this era were a lot better funded, prepared and staffed than both the customer and the privateer teams. This meant that with Ferrari as the only works team, if the governing body didn't do something, Ferrari would win the championship at a canter because they would be able to outdevelop their rivals by a considerable margin. Therefore, the governing body, the FIA, decided that until another major manufacturer joined Formula One, the sport would run to Formula 2 regulations instead. This would mean less costs and less development advantage for Ferrari, as the cost of being in F1 were much less with F2 regulations in place. With these provisions in place, there was supposed to be a closer grid where the smaller teams could actually compete against the big powers. In the first season of the F2 regulations, you'd presume a shaken-up order where the smaller teams could get really good results and possibly get podiums and even wins. Piero Taruffi won the season opener for Ferrari in Switzerland as team leader Ascari didn't attend as he was preparing to race in the Indy 500. Troy Ruttman then won the Indy 500, although F1 historians tend to ignore the Indy results, as although the race was technically a part of the Formula 1 calendar, there was almost no driver crossover between Indy and Formula 1, and the cars were very different. In the next F1 round at Spa, Ascari won at a canter with pole and fastest lap. Oh, and you know those regulations brought in to stop Ferrari from dominating as the only big works team? Ascari qualified 15 seconds clear of the next non-Ferrari car at Spa at the 5-minute-long circuit. Yes, that's 15 seconds clear. Ascari proceeded to win all of the 5 remaining races that season, taking 4 pole positions. Ferrari got 1-2 in every race, not including Indy, and got 4 1-2 free finishes, as this was the era of more than 2 car teams. Going into the 1953 season, Ascari was on a 6-race winning streak and Ferrari on a 3-race 1-2-3 streak. Ascari and Ferrari's dominance would continue, as the Italian would win another 3 races to take his winning streak up to 9, a record which would only be equalled by Sebastian Vettel 60 years later. Ferrari's consecutive race-winning record would be extended to 11 races, when Ascari's winning streak was broken by his British teammate Mike Hawthorn. Ascari returned to the top step of the podium in Silverstone before Giuseppe Farina took the final win of his illustrious career in the German Grand Prix after Ascari's win in Bremgarten for the Swiss Grand Prix. During the 2 seasons of 1952 and 53, Ferrari had won 14 races out of 15, with 34 drivers on the podium out of the possible 45. Furthermore, there was only 1 race where there was less than 2 Ferraris on the podium, which was a 1953 French race, which saw Ferrari's Mike Hawthorn win, followed by the 2 Argentine drivers of Fangio and Gonzalez in their Maseratis. After this complete dominance for 2 seasons, following the late-season emergence of Maserati and Lancia and the entry of new works team Mercedes, the new technical regulations would allow Formula 1 cars to be actual Formula 1 cars again for the first time since 1951, to the relief of probably everyone. Although maybe this change was too much for double-time reigning champion Ascari, who didn't finish an F1 race in either of the next 2 seasons before dying in a testing crash in circumstances eerily similar to those of his father's death. Alberto and Antonio Ascari, Antonio being Alberto's father of course, both died on the 26th of the month, both aged 36, both had won 13 Grand Prix in the top level of motor racing, both were killed 4 days after surviving very serious accidents, as Alberto took a dive into the Monaco harbour less than a week before his death. Both father and son crashed at the exit of an easy left-hand corner, and both left behind a wife and 2 children, in tragically similar circumstances to each other. As F1 moved into the new F1 era with Ascari dogged by bad luck, the Mercedes of Fangio, Moss, Carl Kling and Hans Hermann were the best cars on the grid, as Fangio won the championship this year in 1954 and the year after in 1955. Following Ascari's death, there weren't many remnants of that all-conquering Ferrari team. Giuseppe Farina and Piero Taruffi, Ascari's race-winning teammates, had both retired from Grand Prix racing, and the other winner, Mike Hawthorn, would be dead before the decade finished. This weird anecdote of F1 history, where F2 cars were used in F1, is rarely mentioned or even known by most people. However, if it were to happen today, it would be seen as ridiculous. The thought of Max Verstappen fighting Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc or Fernando Alonso in F2 cars would be laughable at best, although it would be interesting to see who would come out on top. Who do you think would come out on top? People in the comments. With that being said, that's the end of the video, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day, and I'll see you all later. Bye!